Today's social studies lesson is all about cities, towns, and farms in the 13 colonies. You will need your notebooks today, so make sure you have those and a pencil. We're going to get started here. I'm going to share my screen with you. All righty, cities, towns, and farms in the 13 colonies is what the chapter was about. First person that we need to recognize is a man named Ben Franklin. Now, Ben Franklin was a pretty awesome guy. He was a very smart, creative thinker. He lived in Philadelphia. Now, he was born in Boston, but he moved to Philadelphia, which was the largest city in the colonies. He was training to become a printer. It was Ben Franklin who really helped Philadelphia become a successful city at that time. Let's see some of the things that Ben Franklin did. First of all, he founded the first newspaper in town. He thought it was important to get the news out to the people. He founded the first public library. He thought it was a great idea to share knowledge and to share books that you could check out and return for other people to use. He founded the first hospital in town. Back then, doctors used to make house calls, and they would go from house to house to house, and they had a long day with lots of travel. He thought, wouldn't it be great if we had one area in town where you could go to see a doctor instead of the doctor having to do all of that traveling? He also started the volunteer fire department. Now, the buildings and homes back then were all made out of wood, and they had a lot of trouble with fires. So he arranged for volunteers to come and help put out fires. When they heard the bells ringing, they would gather and they would join in to stop the fire. Here are some cool inventions of Ben Franklin. First of all, I'll make it bigger right here. He invented these. These are bifocals. Bifocals are a kind of glasses that have kind of half and half lenses in them. If you look through the bottom half of your glasses, like you're looking down to read, it magnifies the print. It makes it bigger. If you look through the top, it gave you whatever correction you needed to your vision to help you see better. So he invented the bifocals. Another thing he invented, let's go over here to this picture here, was something called the lightning rod. Let me move it over here so you can see it. The lightning rod was a piece of metal that was placed at the top of a building. Now, the buildings that were tallest, houses and buildings, would often get struck by lightning. And by placing a lightning rod at the top, the lightning, instead of hitting the building, would hit the top of the lightning rod, and that energy, electricity, would be carried all the way down through a wire to where it hit the ground, where it became grounded. So instead of starting the building on fire, that surge of energy would be taken down to the ground, and then it would stop. I'm going to skip the glass harmonica and come back to that at the end. But he also created this. This down here was the library chair. And it was pretty cool. You could sit in the chair, but then you could turn it so that it became steps. So you could step up and step up and step up on it to reach books on taller shelves. So it's kind of a two-in-one chair there. He invented swim fins. I think we've all put fins on the back of on our feet to help us move quicker in water. Benjamin Franklin really liked to swim. He also created this long-reaching device, which is right over here. Macy Jerome used this sometimes. This long-reaching device, his was made out of wood, and you would use it to reach things that were too high for you, and you could use it to pinch it and to grab it to help you reach things. He also created the Franklin stove. I'll move that up here so you can see it. Now, the Franklin stove was pretty neat invention back then. Now, the houses would be heated with fireplaces, and then they would have a separate area where they would have like a stove to do their cooking on. But what Benjamin Franklin did is he combined the fireplace and the stove into one. So you would light your fire up, which would heat the house, which was right up here. But underneath it would be a stove, like an oven. While you were heating your house, you could also use this area to cook your food. So he combined the two and made the Franklin stove. Another thing he made over here is something called a catheter. Now, for us, this will sound kind of gross, but for the medical field, it was pretty amazing invention. So if somebody needed to have surgery and you're going to do a longer surgery, you needed to make an invention that would help you so that you wouldn't go to the bathroom while you were in surgery. So they would use this hose to hook up to you so that if you had to pee while you were in surgery, the pee then would go down through this tube into a bag so that it wouldn't be a big mess during surgery. And that's called a catheter, and they still use that today. Another thing he invented, which some people don't really care for, is daylight savings time. And he used that to help the farmers have more light in their field so that they could gather their crops and plant their crops. I'm going to stop sharing my screen just for a second here, and we're going to go and we're going to visit a website that you're going to get to see what this glass harmonica is. So let's move down this, and we're gonna, sorry about this, move it down a little bit. And we're gonna click on that. And let's take a minute here and listen to Ben Franklin's invention of the glass harmonica. Now you have to keep dipping your fingers on this, and then it rotates and it makes this cool sound. There, that gave you an idea of what that instrument sounded like. Pretty neat sounding instrument. And Benjamin Franklin was just such a creative man. He thought outside the box, and he had lots of great inventions to help the colonies even be better. So today we're going to make a little chart on a page in your notebook and label the top of it colonial towns. And then you're going to make 3 columns here and label them NE for New England, Middle, and then Southern. And we're just going to go over a couple of facts about each of the towns in these areas, starting with the New England towns. The first word to write under New England would be Puritans. The Puritans are the ones that settled here. Remember, they were very strict religiously. These towns were self-sufficient, which means they kind of did everything on their own. They didn't ask for help from other areas or from other towns. Everything they needed was right inside that town. Inside a New England town, they had an important area called the town common. The town common was kind of like a big open space, like a big green park, where they would bring their livestock. And by that, I mean sheep and cattle and horses. If they came into town, they would bring their animals with them if they were bringing them to the butcher or if they were riding their horses. And this town common was an area where their animals could be kept while they were in town. They also had what was called a meeting house. We kind of still have these meeting houses. We call them City Hall. The meeting house is where they would meet for church. They would meet for their town meetings or for gatherings for funerals, for weddings. So the meeting house was the most important place in town. So the New England towns had the Puritans. They were self-sufficient. They had a town common for animals and a meeting house where they all met for important meetings. Heading over to the middle towns. First of all, in the middle colonies, there were many small towns, kind of like there are today. Now, these towns set up places called marketplaces. Marketplaces is where you could come to buy and trade and sell things such as crops that you were growing on your farm. It's kind of like a farmer's market. If you've ever gone to one before, you have people selling their crafts, their arts that they made. They have people selling things from their gardens. They have bakeries that they make buns and breads and that they sell there. So it's like a big farmer's market. They also had general stores. General stores would be more like your grocery store where you could go in and buy spices and flour and sugar, and you could buy really anything that you needed for groceries. And that was in the middle colonies. Finally, our southern colonies. That was mainly made up of plantations. Plantations were those large farms, remember, that grew mainly cash crops. The plantations were very self-sufficient too. They didn't have a lot of big towns in the southern colonies. Most of it was made up of these plantations. And they pretty much grew and made everything that they needed, and they were self-sufficient. They kept to themselves. They were owned by very wealthy people. So if you were in the South and you owned a plantation, you had a lot of money. Finally, the last word there is these plantations were run by an overseer. The overseer was the plantation manager. He was the one in charge. The overseer usually was a very strict man. He was the one who punished the slaves if they refused to work or if they did something wrong, and he would punish them very severely. Pretty bad guy in a lot of places. So the overseer. And that pretty much sums up what the towns were like in the New England and the middle and the southern colonies. And if you lived on a farm in any of these, farm families were also like they are today, very hardworking families who get up early, who work late, and are used to a lot of hard work. So that sums up our chapter on cities, towns, and farms in the 13 colonies.